So something is happening on the campuses, chaos on the campuses of the United States. Let's talk to economist and US political commentator who I've spoken to many times, but for the met last night in person for the very first time. And what a pleasure that was. Laurie Laird. Hello, Laurie.
Yeah, nice to see you, Kevin, and I'm glad I'm no longer out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, you certainly aren't. Now that I know you really exist, you're not just an image on a screen.
I'm not a bot somewhere.
Yeah. Now, what do you think is going on there? I mean, we're going to be looking at some footage of what went on at UCLA. I mean, these aren't sort of gentle student protests. This is like a war. Look at this.
Look, it started out, though, as gentle student protests. And some of these kids who were being interviewed were talking about the sense of community, and we're eating together. And I felt like I was reading about a kid's first visit to Glastonbury, right? It did start out gently. But, Kevin, I want to invoke what your last guest was saying, the historian, who was absolutely fascinating.
Wasn't
and hearing
he?
you quote some, and hearing you quote some historical references as well. Very impressed. I'm going to tune into your show more often.
Yeah,
but he was
that's because I'm such an intellectual, you see.
Well, you're a man of so many talents. But your guest was saying, if we are ignorant of history, we will repeat it. Now, I would argue that some of these students are ignorant of what they are discussing, what they are protesting against. We are seeing groups of, gays for Hamas. Okay.
Yeah. Why don't you go to Gaza if you're? There's an organisation here, Laurie, called Queers for Palestine. Well, why don't you go to Gaza and see how you get greeted by your Palestinian friends?
Yeah, it's an interesting juxtaposition of values, isn't it? But I'm incredibly frustrated that some of these elite universities aren't teaching students about the nuances of their argument. Yeah. This is not a straight up and down conflict. And you need to study a lot to try and understand the ins and the outs. I feel like I don't know much about it, and I need to learn more. But these are the best and the brightest, right? These are some at Columbia University.
Yeah, this is the top university, isn't it?
This is one of the top. And by the way, it costs about $70,000 a year to go there a year. I can imagine some of these kids' parents are not particularly happy. Little Johnny's, sitting, taking over Hamilton Hall, digressing a bit. Yeah. But this is one of my personal frustrations here. This is where we're training leaders of the next generation, leaders of tomorrow, yet they can't seem to hear a point that they don't agree with. And I find this incredibly frustrating.
Indeed. But how did we get to this point? I mean, I suppose, come to think of it, thinking about Kent State and stuff like that, I mean, violence on American campuses is not a new concept. We've had it before.
It's not.
But look at this. I don't know if you can see this, but on UCLA campus, I mean, this is really serious. This is like a war.
Yeah, and some of the, I'm not looking at the video, but I've seen some of it. And certainly it seems like the greatest violence was at UCLA, a lot less so at Columbia. But some of these kids would like to invoke these comparisons with 1968 at Kent State, at the University of Chicago, where there was real violence. But these were different sorts of protests. I mean, this is a country united against a war, which at that point, the Vietnam War, which really was a losing proposition. These students were seeing their peers being killed in great numbers on every day. This is a different sort of conflict. And just to highlight that, Kevin, have you seen the interview of the doctoral student at Columbia University who was demanding, she was very upset that the university wasn't bringing them food? And she used the word starvation and dehydration, again, not showing a whole lot of sensitivity to what people in Gaza are actually going through. So this is a different set of protests. And while I like seeing students who are interested in things, my kids don't have those sorts of interests. But there's protest and there's criminality. And in some of these places at Columbia University, when kids went into the main hall, when you see broken windows, that's going into criminality.
So, Laurie, I mean, there's a sort of feeling here in Britain and across the West, and of course America as well, there's a sense of serious global unrest. Obviously, a lot of it emanates from the situation in Gaza and the Middle East, but we've got Ukraine, we've got Russia, so many areas of conflict. The Yemen still rages on. There's a feeling that tension in the air is getting worse and worse and worse. And these sort of protests, these punch-ups, these conflicts on American campuses, we have them here as well. I mean, do you sense that there's a sort of a decline, a breakdown in our societies going on here?
No, I really don't, Kevin, but I can point you to a presidential candidate that does. And certainly these sorts of protests fit into
I can
Donald
find him in a
Trump's
court, can't I, in Manhattan?
Yeah, not on a Wednesday, though. He gets the day off on
does
Wednesday.
he?
But it does fit into his dystopian narrative of America completely going to the dogs. I might argue this a different way, in that in much of America, people haven't had it so good, at least in terms of aggregate. Unemployment is very low. Employment is actually growing. Wages are growing. Inflation is a little high, but coming down. And we tend to wonder a little bit when there is, when things are good at home, people need to band together, and being able to protest like this on campuses is a little bit of a privilege at this point.
Yeah. I mean, those kids at Columbia should be grateful they got parents who could afford 70 grand a year to go.
Without a doubt, Kevin.
First world problems and all that. But Laurie,
a little bit.
Got to go, Laurie, but great to talk to you.